welcome everyone to this workshop, late Friday afternoon, so probably one of the last sessions of this CPDP conference. Thanks for being here. Maybe, well, you all came because you will have read the title of the workshop. I would like to ask, any one of you is familiar with GDPR certification, yes or no? Are you here mainly to learn about certification, or do you have prior knowledge?
I'll answer the question, because yes or no.
Yeah, yeah.
Who has experience?
Yeah, of course, yeah, okay. But we assume, you know, that most people, even like for ourselves here at the table, we can assure you we've been working on GDPR certification for quite a while, now a few years now, setting up, you know, the entire scheme, and it remains complicated. There is still a lot of questions. So this is a workshop to the extent that, you know, we will try to be as practical as possible. However, a real workshop where we can have use cases will be for next year. So by this, we already invite you to next year's workshop on GDPR certification, where we can go more in depth. At this table, we have Giovanni Francescutti, who is global manager at DNV. DNV is an international accredited registrar. We have Sebastien Ziegler, who is president of the International Board of Experts of Europrivacy. Europrivacy being the first officially approved EU-wide certification scheme, so approved by the EDPB last year in October, if I'm not mistaken. And we have Pieter, Gryffroy, who is a lawyer at Timelex, and we will see that with these three parties, all the stakeholders involved in a certification journey are actually represented. We'll see that to go through the journey, you need first to be prepared, and then you need someone to actually certify you, and then we have someone representing this scheme. The first scheme, it's not excluded that other schemes, or there are already other schemes, or that other EU-wide schemes would appear, but ultimately there won't be room on the market for 100 schemes. You know, it's like always like that. A few that are the most recognized in the market will survive. What was I going to say? Okay, first of all, something about certification. Certification is mentioned 73 times in the GDPR. That's quite a bit, mainly when the GDPR is talking about risk management, demonstrating compliance, enhancing transparency, and I think, Giovanni, Sebastien, I don't know who of you went to the booth downstairs of Europrivacy. There's these beautiful flyers laying and actually very well communicating what Europrivacy or certification is about: reducing risks, building trust, accountability, competitive advantage, increasing revenues. I'm mentioning these, but of course the speakers will say more about that. My main, and it's in the middle here, term would be accountability. Accountability being the main novelty of the GDPR, demonstrating compliance. Yesterday was the 25th of May, 5 years of GDPR, in practice at least. So I think it's a nice moment to look back. The 5 years were mainly about making sure organizations are compliant. From now on, it will be a lot about demonstrating compliance. We see that a lot. By the way, I'm Geert Somers. I'm a lawyer myself. We are in the same law firm, Timelex, and we have been helping our clients being compliant. But we see in practice that a lot of business partners are asking actually to, well, you know, show more about your compliance. They want reassurances, and the problem is, how do you demonstrate your compliance? It's not easy. You can say you're compliant, but how should someone believe that? The thing is that the GDPR is not mathematical. There are no strict rules. It's principle based, and how do you measure that? It's difficult to measure. The only way to measure it is by translating these principles, larger principles, into measurable objective criteria. And this is what the certification is about, comparable to ISO certification, by the way, but a bit more difficult when it's principle based. So that's why the International Board of Experts of Europrivacy has been working for quite a few years. And I'm saying the International Board because there has been input from professionals globally. It's called Europrivacy, but we'll see also, I think Sebastien will address it, that this is not ultimately meant to be just a European scheme, and there is room for globalization as data protection is going global. Yeah, the International Board of Experts has been working on this for quite a few years. And okay, so you have these criteria now that have been approved, and as an organization, you can start implementing and measuring these criteria, making sure that you have all the documentation to complete your compliance level for the GDPR. But then the next problem is like how do you prove to the outside world that you actually did it? And that's what certification is about, having an independent third party coming to assess your procedures, your documents, and saying, okay, you are compliant. Just like, you know, with your car, if you're going to a technical control of your car, you need to go, they'll check all the criteria, and then afterwards you'll get a seal. Same here. But before you go to the car, to the technical control, you usually also go to a garage who's going to help you make sure that all the checks, you know, that you comply with all the requirements for a technical control of your car. And a bit the same is true with GDPR certification. It's quite complicated, so there are organizations, official partners of Europrivacy, who help organizations to be ready to make sure that you check all the boxes before someone else can actually validate and say, yes, indeed, you do check the boxes. And that would be the task of someone like Giovanni. Yeah, okay, so what else can I say is that, and then I will give the floor to you guys, certification is not about starting from scratch. Especially organizations who already worked on their compliance will actually use certification as a way to assess, to see, do we indeed have everything? See it a bit as a GDPR maturity exercise also, completing where you're still lacking compliance, maybe also questioning what has been done, because as we've seen with our clients too, some clients, you know, did their work, but then realized, okay, maybe that was not the right qualification. Yeah, maybe we should review this. And so it's also an excellent opportunity to do that. There is some investment to do, but I think Sebastien will certainly also talk about that. It's an investment that is largely worth the money and that can be turned into a competitive advantage. We have a few clients who want to move fast now to be first movers on the market, to be able to say, hey, we have the certificate, and then the ball will get rolling for sure. So that's why I said next year, rendezvous here at CPDP with some very concrete use cases. We can discuss the first certificates on the market, so that will be interesting too. Second point I wanted to make is that certification is clearly something voluntary. It's not something you have to do, but something that will de facto become a standard in the market. We believe that it will become a requirement often in procurement, especially public procurements, private procurements, where they say, okay, if you want to do business with me, then especially from a controllers requiring this from their service providers, processors, as a way of reassuring themselves, we did our due diligence, we are relying on someone externally who has gone through that process, and so we kind of cover ourselves with regard to the selection we make of an external service provider. It's really organizations who go for certifications should see it as a cherry on the pie. It's really like the final completion, something that you can use, that cherry, to the outside world of showing, okay, look, we completed our exercise, and you gain extra trust. You also gain more confidence in your own organizations, from your employees yourself to move forward. And last but not least, and again, this probably will be said, you cannot go for certification if you don't have a DPO. So organizations who already have a DPO, of course, no problem. Those who don't need one should first get a DPO to go through certification. But the good thing about certification is that for an internal DPO, this can be used as something towards management to valorize the efforts that have been made, because very often a DPO is working hard, it's not necessarily seen. So if a DPO actually helps to go for a certificate and that certificate is there, the organization can use it to the outside world, and the DPO's work is also given more worth. I think that's about what I wanted to say as an introduction, and then I would like to pass the floor, and I forgot to actually click my slides. I'm sorry for that, but I'm just talking, so... Olena? Ah, yeah, okay, sorry. So, voila, speakers, we introduced. I discussed the legal framework. Next is Sebastien, who will talk about Europrivacy. Then Giovanni will talk about the certification journey. Pieter will talk about preparation for GDPR certification. And then we will also commonly talk about an audit, certification, and maintenance. And there will be room for questions and answers. The session is meant to last until 5:15, so we have an hour for the rest of the session.
We had one question already.
Ah, okay, excellent, please.
Sorry. I was going to ask, can we still go for a certification if we have an external DPO?
Yes, of course, of course. Yeah, it doesn't have to be an internal DPO.
Internal
A DPO is a DPO, yeah, for sure,
Thank you.
of course.
The rationale behind it is when we designed the scheme, we realized, okay, we align with GDPR requirements, but we decided that even if it's not mandatory for SME, we thought that having someone in charge of the compliance would be mandatory to deliver a certification. We can't say it was not good enough just to satisfy the criteria if you have nobody in charge of overviewing and ensuring that the company is doing the things right on a regular basis. So it can be external, no problem, but you need to have someone in charge.
And so, voila, the recital, and actually I already discussed this. Maybe also one interesting point is it can also be a useful tool to lower your potential fines. The authorities will definitely take into account certification that has been obtained, unless if there was fraudulent, fraud behind it. But otherwise, it's a best part of a best effort practice. And certification will most likely be used in the future also for international transfers. Sebastien will also say more about that. And then I will now pass on the floor to Sebastien.
Thank you very much. So, let me come here. So first of all, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for the end of the CPDP. It's a great pleasure. So let me start by the beginning. So a little bit the genesis. So Europrivacy was researched and developed in the context of the European Research Program. It was supported by indeed several projects. We continue to work with different European research projects also to extend it to address specific domain or regulatory extensions like EHDS, AI Act, and others. So it's really a scheme which has been closely designed and worked with the European research community, so legal expertise, but also ICT and technical expertise, so working also on emerging technologies such as AI. As it was mentioned, we have the great pleasure and great honor and great responsibility so that Europrivacy has been approved, the criteria have been approved to serve as the European Data Protection Seal. So it's the only, there may be one day, and it's likely that sooner or later there may be others, but for the time being, it's really the only scheme which is available to deliver certification to certify compliance of data processing in a way which is recognized all over Europe. You have now 2 national schemes, but which can be used only at the national level, which have not been approved by EDPB. They've been reviewed, but then EDPB gave some feedbacks, and then the national authorities could adopt it. Europrivacy is the only one which has been approved by EDPB, which means by the 27 EU National Data Protection Authority or Supervisory Authority. And that's very important because it means that when you are using the criteria, even without aiming at a certification, you are using criteria which have been reviewed, discussed, during more than 2 years by all the 27 national data protection authorities. I have to say that also through the process with EDPB, we have learned a lot. So the scheme is also something which has evolved over time. It's not something which was just submitted, just okay, no, that's, no, because at the same time that we were submitting the Europrivacy at the EDPB, the national authorities were discovering, were working there. They learned with us and we learned with them in the process. So we had a scheme, but through the process with EDPB, it was quite substantially refined, addressing questions, bringing solutions to EDPB, but also addressing concerns from one or the other authority. So a very interesting process. It's really a I would say, a co-creation exercise. It's not my scheme. It's not even, I wouldn't say, it's not even just a scheme of the International Board of Experts. It's really a co-creation process to deliver something which is reliable, efficient, and applicable to all kinds of data processing activities. So what is it about? It is fundamentally, it's not only about the paradox, it's not only about delivering certificate. It's first of all to reduce risk, to enable any controller or processor to use criteria, and as it was mentioned by Geert, when you want to implement the GDPR, you have a norm, a regulatory norm, and you try to translate it into your reality, your practical data processing. It's not always easy. You have always a risk of interpretation, of subjective bias or cognitive bias. So the idea was really to find a way to propose a methodology and a set of criteria which would enable anyone to assess the compliance of its data processing with the obligation of the regulation. So that's the first element. Then, in parallel to that, it's to document. So to be able to use this criteria to document that you're doing the things right. Geert mentioned the term accountability. It means that if at a certain moment you have a supervisory authority which wants to inspect your activities or which has questions, you can very easily use your documentation to say, oh, data protection by design and by default, we have this following evidence to demonstrate that we have done it. Lawfulness, we have the evidence. Data minimization, we have the evidence, and so on. So it's a way to really structure the way you document your compliance. And then, of course, once you have data processing which are compliant with the different criteria, then the next steps is, if you wish, it's not an obligation, but then to request a certification. So you can even do it for all your data processing and then pick up the ones which are the most important for you. It's really up to you. Few elements in terms of value proposition. What does it bring in more detailed view? As I mentioned, identify and reduce the risk. So legal, financial, reputational risk for the applicants. It can be a public administration, a company, but of course also the risk for the data subject. So it's really reducing the risk for all parties, for yourself, if you are DPO, or for your company, your employer, or controller, or processor, and for the society as a whole, and for the data subject. It's to enable to demonstrate and communicate the compliance. Again, as it was mentioned, it's very easy to sign an SCC and to say, of course, I respect the GDPR. I've signed it. And often people will do it with a lot of good faith, and in many cases it will be the reality. But there are many cases where either you think you're right, but you are not, or you don't really think what you say. And for the third party, it's very difficult to assess. To know, is it really reliable? And again, that's a way, as it was mentioned, the only way to have really a third parties, professional, impartial auditors coming and assessing, doing the work with a lot of professionalism. And Giovanni will tell you more about it in a few minutes. And to be able to communicate it, so to build trust among the different parties, to improve reputation, access to markets. We skip it. One element which is important, building trust and confidence. And the reason why we always stress these two terms, because it's not only about building trust with third parties. So that's why if you're a DPO, you often have a lot of stress and you have a lot of uncertainty. If you're a DPO of a small shop, it's okay, you have everything under control. But let's imagine you're a DPO of an insurance company with different branches, or even branches in other countries. Very difficult to assess it. And the certification you can use even for internal audit, or to have a better understanding, better control, to ensure that things are under control. And then again, building confidence in what you are doing. Confidence for the DPO, confidence for the controller, the entity, again, public administration company, confidence if it's a company, even for the shareholders. So it's really a factor, a mechanism to build trust among the different parties, and that's very important. To extend compliance to non-EU jurisdictions, that's another characteristic. In the beginning of the development of the scheme, we took the decision to say it's not only about EU or EEA, it goes beyond that. So how can we leverage on the GDPR to provide a common framework which can be used also by non-EU members? I I think we are working, for instance, we have an extension of Europrivacy with ICO, UK, which is in the process of being approved. We have working with the Federal Department of Justice in Switzerland, also to ensure that it can be recognized in Switzerland. We are working currently with about 20 non-EU jurisdictions to ensure that we can use the GDPR as a benchmark for data protection compliance, not only in Europe, but beyond Europe. And that's another element. To develop competitive advantage, of course, for a company, that's an important factor. Another element, and I will come back to this, really also to value the compliance. As it was mentioned also by Geert, one of the challenge when you are a DPO usually, and for those of you who are acting as DPO, internal or external DPO, you often have to fight to get your budget. Because for the board, they see it, okay, it's neat to have, but it's a cost. So we try to allocate resources more on center of profits than on cost. So usually you always have this negotiation with the board of director, which will say, okay, we will give you a little bit of resource to do your work, but we need to give the priority to what will generate revenue for the company. And because it's perceived as a cost. And all the work that a DPO does is often invisible, something that is not recognized. We know it exists, but usually we talk to the DPO when there is a crisis, when there is a complaint, when there is an issue. And it's difficult to value the work which is done. And again, the certification is a way to turn this effort into an asset, into something valuable, something that can be recognized, that can be used by the marketing department, sales department, or for B2B relationship, or for investors. So it's a way to say to the decision maker, to the board of directors, to the shareholder, look, you are not spending money, you are investing money to create value for the company. And that's a very important paradigm shift for the work of the DPO. To ease cross-border and processor data transfer, it was mentioned, a data controller has a liability or responsibility for the actions or non-action of its data processors. Certification is a way to reduce the surface of risk for the controller at no cost. So, for instance, it's also a mechanism, as it is mentioned, it was mentioned before under Article 46, but also Article 42, to use the certification in non-EU jurisdictions to demonstrate compliance. And then you have two cases. I will not enter into much details, but you have two cases. According to EDPB, you have cases where you have activities, data processing activities outside of the EEA, which are subject to the GDPR. For instance, a controller which is actively targeting the European market, they are subject to the GDPR by the fact that they are addressing the market. And then you have cases where you are not directly addressing, but you still need to have a mechanism for international data transfer under Article 46. So there are different nuances, but we are working on it with EDPB and CNPD also to ensure that Europrivacy soon will be also applicable as a mechanism for international data transfer. So it's a way also to support this process. Receive continuous regular updates and legally recognize. I will skip that. What do we need to certify data processing activities? To comply with the regulation. That's the first element. So if you have done your homework to comply, to ensure compliance with the various obligations of the GDPR, you have a very good starting point, because what we are assessing is not to come with very exotic, creative requirements. We really try to address the GDPR requirements and translate it into auditable, factual-based requirements and criteria to assess it. Then to have a DPO and a record of data processing activities, it was mentioned, and then to document the compliance with the different criteria. So very straightforward. The good news also with the GDPR, as you know, there were discussions at the very beginning, including when the GDPR entered into force, EDPB, DG Justice, to say, can we leave a room to have a certification of a management system like ISO 27001? And both the DG Justice and EDPB decided no, it's too high level. So the decision was made that under the GDPR, under Article 42 or 43, what you can certify are data processing activities. But the good news with that, there are two very good news with that. The first one is that it is far more reliable. Again, let's imagine a very large company, I will not name any name, but which would have a certificate saying, oh, the company is fully compliant with the GDPR. Honestly, even with the best auditor in the world, with the most talented auditors in the world, the level of reliability would be certainly questionable. It's impossible. or it's too high level. We can say, okay, there is a policy, but it doesn't mean that the policy is implemented. It doesn't mean that it is effective and real. The second good element is that for controllers and processors, they can focus on first things first. They can identify among all the data processing activities where are the highest risk for them and for the data subject. So they can really focus. They don't need to be perfect everywhere. They can really focus, set the priorities to work on the first data processing, document them, certify them, and then move to other ones if they wish, or just use the criteria to document them without certifying them. But you have this possibility to be focused, to have a priority strategy in terms of certification. How does it work? So you need, first of all, to choose and specify your target of evaluation. You have a certain level of flexibility. EDPB voluntarily decided not to be too specific. So sometimes it may be frustrating for some people to say, oh, but how? Because EDPB sometimes voluntarily doesn't want to be too specific, to leave some room and to let the practice refine it. They want also to see not only what is their vision, but like in a good Aristotelian approach, to let the reality, as to adopt, embrace, assess the reality, to refine it with the practice. But clearly they've set two limits. It cannot be too general, so you cannot have a certificate for a whole company, no way, or for the whole management systems. And it cannot be too specific. Let's say, I would like to certify the submit button of my website, too specific, because it would be misleading. So the key idea behind it, it should not be misleading. It should be easily understandable by the data subject. It should be something that you can effectively assess. So you need to be able, for instance, to map what are the data coming in your target of evaluation, who has access to the data in order to effectively assess the compliance. Then you need to specify your target of evaluation. And for this, we have dedicated resources. We have a dedicated checklist, which translate the expectations of EDPB for the definition of the target of evaluation, to pre-validate your target of evaluation. And then you can work, and I think we'll hear more from Geert, from Pieter, and from Giovanni, that you have partners also can help you to refine it. And then you validate with this checklist, and then you can start. And how does it work? Once you have your target of evaluation, which is defined, you will document the compliance. And the idea with that is really to already reduce the risk. And you can even stop there if you think, okay, or you may identify non-conformity and we say, okay, maybe we need a little more time because we have identified a certain number of non-conformities, we will work on it. Maybe we will suspend the process for some time to address them, or we are ready and we can move to the next steps, which is then to invite a certification body to come and to certify the compliance. And that creates value. That's where you turn your effort into something valuable that you can communicate, that you can demonstrate to third parties. And then once you have certified your data processing activities, you have a monitoring process. So you need every year to have a surveillance audit, which is far shorter, but which is here to build trust. So to ensure that what you've done 3 years ago is still valid. It's not that you did something 3 years ago, and indeed you still have the label, but you don't know really if it works. And that was as a requirement from EDPB, which is important. We have, in order to support it, developed a scheme owner, a whole set of resources. So we have public website, but we have also an online academy to train people, for DPOs, for implementers, for auditors to learn how to use the scheme, the criteria, how to implement it. And we have another platform, which is the Europrivacy Resource and Community website, where we gather all the required online resources. So guidelines, handbooks, the criteria, of course, and so on. We have also developed what we named a welcome pack. Again, the idea is to facilitate the onboarding, the adoption. It's really to make Europrivacy not only something which is working, effective, but which is enjoyable, as much enjoyable as possible. So it's really about assessing, certifying, and enjoying. And when we say enjoying, it's really the ambition. It's not that we say, oh, it's nice, a kind of marketing wording, not at all. It's really, we know that for many DPOs, for many controller and processor, the GDPR compliance is not easy, it's not straightforward. So one of the raison d'etre of the criteria is precisely to enable to make it clearer, easier to implement. And really what we do is a lot of effort to make the journey as user-friendly as possible, and that's why we have also this ecosystem of partners. We decided as ECCP, the European Center, to focus on a role of scheme owners. So we work on updating the scheme, but then we make it available to qualified partners. We have an ecosystem which is open. Companies can apply, but it's very selective. We are really filtering to ensure that those who are joining the ecosystem have the adequate expertise, competence, and then they are there to support, either to implement or to certify once the documentation is ready. I think that's it. I guess.
Sebastien. Yeah, so I'll just talk a little bit about the certification journey. So basically what we do as implementers with our clients. So the idea being that we get involved in the whole journey, trying to guide a DPO specifically through the process, because as much as Europrivacy is quite straightforward and clear and measurable, it is still something you have to learn. You have to assess how to do it, how to implement it, how to document, how to go from your actual compliance and the documentation that you have to the kind of dossier, the kind of file you need to compile to actually go to a certification body. So this is kind of where a firm like Timelex or qualified implementer would come in to guide you through that journey, so you don't need to learn about all the specificities. You don't need to go through 3 years of understanding how exactly everything works. Well, not that it takes 3 years, but there's quite a bit of effort invested. It is relatively complex. GDPR is never very easy. So this is why we think that is quite useful. You could do it by yourself, of course, but then you need to take an exam. You need to become a qualified implementer. You need to learn about how everything works. So this is a service that we offer clients who are interested, basically to move faster and also to not overburden a DPO team that is usually already quite busy. The 3 main steps that you have in your certification journey is first your preparation. So really, I will detail that in the next slides. Basically doing a gap analysis, making sure that you're ready, preparing to actually go to a certification body. Then you've got the second bit, which is the interaction with the certification body, the feedback, the potential issues and non-conformities that you then have an opportunity to solve. And ideally, if everything goes well, you end up with a certificate. As Sebastien said as well, it could be quite useful even if you don't manage to get there. So I think some clients have expressed worries. What if we find along the way, some bodies in the closet? What if there's issues that we can't overcome? Well, then you stop the process. So there's nobody, it's not public, nobody's informed up until the point that you actually say, we're going for the certificate. So at that point, public will know, but also supervisory authorities will know. So this is the step where you really say, we are confident, and then you are, of course, rewarded with being able to sell that and show, okay, we have this independent third-party assessment and this supervisory authority check. We're doing really well. If on court route, if in the process you finalize, you find things that are a bit of an issue, you can indeed say, okay, we'll take some more time, we'll fix those, but there's not really a risk of alerting someone to potential issues that you didn't know, or that maybe are there and hope you can solve, but you end up not being able to solve them, perfectly. So the certification is usually, of course, where you want to end up. So you can actually have the certificate and sell it. And then you have a maintenance track. So every year there's kind of a check, just an update. Are we still compliant? Have there been major changes? Have there been major, case law interpretations that have changed? Is there a state-of-the-art change that really is something that we need to address? So that is a yearly kind of mini audit, mini check, which also in a way forces you to make sure that happens. It's easy to get delay. It's easy to let things slip if there's a lot of work. So this kind of puts you into a best practice framework, which is obligatory in order to have and maintain the certificates. Certificates are valid for 3 years. So after every 3 years, you need to recertify. The effort required is, of course, smaller because you already have gone through it before and you've had these yearly checks, making sure that you don't have to refer back to documentation from 3 years ago that is maybe outdated and issues. So it's all about really wanting to be best of class and then getting something to be able to sell it and to enjoy the fact that you've put all this effort in. Now we're in this first, just to go back, in this first step of preparation process, and in our 3-step preparation, certification, maintenance. Within that preparation, we first do a step 1 assessment. So it's just a gap analysis of basically where are you? Do you have everything in place? Is everything meeting the criteria as well? Because there is, of course, potentially some things that you have to adapt to really perfectly meet the criteria. You could have instances where you are compliant, you've got in place what you need, but but you still need to check it a little bit. This is theoretical. I think most things are really so close to the GDPR. They've just been made measurable, so it's kind of a checklist to just go over, making sure that you have everything. One thing, for example, is I think like for the DPO, you need to go through a checklist of all the elements and qualifications. So you might have a DPO, for example, and you might not have checked certain qualifications because this you would have to document. That would be an example of where you need to make sure that this is documented as well. And perhaps this is not a big compliance risk in reality, as long as the person is qualified and capable. So this is basically an assessment of what you need. There's a lot of clients that come to us. They want the paper, they want the certificates. If you are not mature, this first assessment is going to be hell. So it's clearly meant for people who are already at a mature level, or who are willing to invest heavily now to really take a sprint and get really compliant before getting the certification. And then the second bit is getting prepared, actually making that file, compiling everything, and going to the certification body to get the actual certification started. So I'll give some more details on both of those sub-steps as well. So what is the first assessment? First, you need to define what we're talking about. Like already explained by Sebastien, it's about data processing activities. It's not about products or services. It's not about companies. That being said, you could cover a service or a product by covering all of the data processing activities that underlie it. So there's a little bit of a distinction to be made. You could theoretically also cover a whole entity by, certifying every single data processing activity they have. That's probably not the smartest approach. You want to go where the value is. You can really sell something. So your core business, for example, processes that you really want to sell towards data subjects, that's where you're going to focus first. So you basically define what are we looking at, and then is the GDPR perfectly implemented for that, which is not only a document check. It's not just making sure, do you have a privacy policy? Do you have your policies in place? It's also your technical and organizational measures. So we also will have to look a little bit into the processes of how you actually maintain all these things. Because once at some point you go to the certification body, they will need to see not only documentation, they will want to see the processes of how you secure your data and how you have your organizational measure in place. So what we do is a kind of non-conformity, is what we call it, non-conformity assessment with the criteria, looking at the gaps that are still there and checking all the documentation you have, because obviously documentation, accountability, documentation is very important, but it's not the only thing. After that, we will remediate the non-conformity, so we will fix things which is policies, but it's also just guiding you in the way that you might need some extra measures to put in place, with the idea that then when you go to the certification body, they will do the same check. So the criteria are accessible to both an implementer or to the applicant. And to the certification body, same criteria, like Sebastien said, very measurable. I think you always use the example, and I will steal it for now. Is there a table in the room? Not is there an adequate table, right? So very measurable, very straightforward. Is it there? Yes or no? Does it meet the requirements that we've set? Which means that as an implementer, we can reliably make sure that you're already at the stage where you will not have a lot of issues with the certification body. There may always be, and there will be a secondary check by the certification body. Are there still non-conformities? Then you still have an opportunity to remedy that, but to move quickly and to not waste time. Of course, as an implementer, we try to make sure that you're pretty much there before we go to a certification body. And that's in the last step. After, of course, the documentation always has to be there, so policies is always something that we will have to review, make sure that everything is there. We are hoping often that people are mature and there's a lot of it already there. But of course, as an implementer and a GDPR specialized law firm, we're happy to help clients to fill any gaps that there might be there. And then we compile the actual application. And so we really make sure that all the documentation is there, that the application is there, that the target of evaluation is very well defined. And then we go for certification. And ideally, that process will work out. But Giovanni will tell a little bit more about how that works then with the certification body and how you move towards that actual certificate. I just wanted to point out that Europrivacy is not controller or process specific, so it's for both. Logically, the requirements in the Europrivacy criteria reflect the requirements of the GDPR, namely that a controller has a lot more core criteria to deal with. So they need to, for example, show a legal basis. They have more documentation to show the data protection impact assessment, for example, if necessary, needs to be there. Whereas logically for a processor, you're kind of making an abstraction, so you can actually get your processes, be an example on that, certified, making a certain abstraction of which controllers will use your service, for example. This is inherent that you cannot cover every single scenario. So it's more there. It's also about core criteria in terms of compliance, yes, because processors do have their own compliance rules under GDPR and their obligations. But it's a lot about technical and organizational measures as well and the processes in place. But so both a controller and a processor could go for this. And we tend to think that probably for processors it's maybe even stronger an argument as a selling point to show, okay, for Article 28, lots of the due diligence has been done because look, we've had an independent third body look at this. The criteria were EDPB approved and the supervisory authority has been informed and didn't say there's an issue here. So it's quite a strong case to say we are compliant. It's been proven exhaustively. So two small examples that we've thought of. Maybe controller first. So one process that is often mentioned is if a controller wants to attract candidates in the recruiting process and say, okay, if you deal with us, we create trust by saying our recruiting process has been GDPR certified and is completely compliant. So that's from a controller point of view. Of course, core business processes are always interesting, but this is one that is often used as an example because also in HR, there's many different processes usually, and you could easily step down from dealing with recruitment first to then also go into salary and accounting and other processes. That kind of highlights the idea that Europrivacy is iterative. And once you've done one processing activity, it becomes a lot easier to do a second, third, fourth, and fifth, because a lot of your core criteria are the same. A lot of your technical and organizational measures are the same. So a lot of your documentation efforts, of your compliance effort is the same. So it's very easy to then iteratively get more processes under the certification. So that's kind of what we wanted to highlight here. From a controller point of view, could be core processes as well, core business processes. And another one that we've had is an idea for, say, okay, you're a service provider. We use here the example of a well-being platform. The idea being that clients who are the controllers offer this well-being platform to their employees for various services. And then the well-being platform itself is the processor for that, and they would want certification. Specifically because then they can sell it to any controller that falls within that same framework, right? So it's not just because it's always important to understand that you get certified for your role vis-a-vis a certain processing activity. So it's not because I get certified as a processor that therefore the controller's processing activity is also certified. They would have to go through their own assessment. So in this case, I, as a well-being platform, think, okay, I'm a processor and I want to certify my processor role vis-a-vis this processing activity, and then sell it to all various clients that might be interested to know that I am completely GDPR compliant. So even within groups of companies, it's always about which role do you have vis-a-vis this processing activity. And there again, it's relevant to know that once you've done the process once, it's much easier to do it second, third, and fourth time, and so basically to enlarge the scope of your certification that you can then sell. All right, so I think if there are questions, please let us know. But then the next step in our story is to go actually to the certification body and try and get the certificate. Yes.
Question. So I understood what you said about so the processor certification not affecting the compliance of the controller necessarily, or certifying the
Not certifying it. Yeah.
certifying
Yeah.
the processing activity, but what about the other way around, which is imagine that I am a processor that provides the same processing activity to a lot of very different controllers.
Mm-hmm.
So does the activity that the controller does affect in any way the scope of the certification of the processor?
So it's always, I don't think there's any direct benefit other than if you are very involved, especially as a processor, the controller says, I'm getting certification, right? I need information from you. If you're very actively involved in the process, and we have a client where that situation applies, then you learn a lot about what needs to be done. You already document it. So then it becomes a smaller step for you to say, oh, I'll get my own certification as a processor. But it's not because the controller in that situation gets a certificate that it automatically is something that the processor can sell as, we also are certified. You are not.
Maybe I can give a compliment. So the idea of the certification is really that you certify data processing under the control, effective control, either of a data controller processor. So it means in the example you had, part of the data processing seems to be on the controller side, the other part on the processor. So if you certify as a controller, you will certify the part which is under your control, which includes also the measures in place to ensure that the processors who will have access to the data provide the adequate guarantee that the adequate technical and organizational measures are in place. Vice versa, if you're on the processor side, you will certify the part which is under your control as a processor, but then you can use it indeed for all the controllers. As you mentioned, if you have different controllers, then it becomes a very important competitive advantage because you can say to all your controllers who are working with your services that now you have a certification that reduces the risk and liability because they are working with a service provider whose service is certified, which under Article 28 reduces the risk and liability for the different controllers, which will be the clients of the processor.
Yeah, yes, I understand that. So my difficulty was more understanding. So if you provide the same service as a processor to very different types of controllers, it might be very difficult to scope what type of data is being processed, for instance. Because if one of your customers is in the medical area, another one is in the financial area, but it sounds a little bit difficult to me sometimes to align the scope of what data is being processed and the processing activities that you
In this context, we have a model where you will need, of course, to do the inventory if you're a processor. To say, if I have clients from the medical sector, then in your target of evaluation, you need to indicate that you have special categories of data. And as soon as you have even one controller which is using special categories of data, in the scheme we have complementary criteria, which makes that you take into account these risks and these complementary obligations. Then whether you have 1 to 100 clients, you have the same level of requirements that you need to address complementary obligations in terms of as processor or controller processing special categories of data. So it's very straightforward. It's not complicated. But you need to clarify. So you need then to ensure that when you define your target of evaluation, you also identify what kind of data are processed into it.
Then is also the role of the certification body that will see also this to understand together with the company, with the implementer, that is the consultant that is implementing this, how you can define the target of evaluation. So to define exactly which are the data processing that you need also to advertise to the market and are the one that are putting under control. That's because sometimes it's not, it's a joint job that we do together, the company, the implementer, and the certification body before even starting the process of certification, to be sure that we are doing the right things also to advertise to the market correctly also what we're doing.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah.
Floor is mine.
The floor is yours.
Oh, okay.
Green button moves forward.
So this one, that is the green arrow. Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about all the certification and maintenance. We are more or less, the cherry supplier of the cake. So the one that is put in the final. We are the certification body. You told before that you are not, familiar with certification. I mean, privacy certification. But how many of you are working, for example, in other kind of certification, like management system certification, ISO 9000, something like that? It's completely.
ISO 27701.
701, yeah, okay, that is privacy is the information maturity management system with the privacy part, yes. Well, okay, moving apart, because when I see my stories, I look at how old am I, so it's better not to move forward. So certification is a matter of trust and confidence, usually. These are more or less the vision that we have as DNV. We are a global certification body, it's a Norwegian certification body, but we have offices all around the world. Actually, it's a matter of trust. Trust is giving, a trust to the market of what the company is doing is done in the right way. confidence is a matter more internally. So is giving the confidence also to the company that what you are doing is done correctly. So trust and confidence are always going together in terms of certification. The role of the certification body is quite well defined. So it's defined by rules that are determining what the certification body could do. We are an examinator at the end. So it's the best job in the world because at the end of the day, yes or no, is all about the company and the implementer to solve the issue. Jokes apart, it's not always like this because the certification body is the one that is together with the implementer and the company is deciding which is, for example, the target of the evaluation. So deciding exactly what the company wants to put under control, wants to certify. Not what to put under control, but better to certify, to demonstrate to the market. That's because the job of the certification body usually starts before starting the process of certification, starts defining together with the company the target of evaluation. So which are the data processing activities that you want to put into the certificates, that you want us to verify. Because sometimes there are companies that want to have, the wider approach, but it's very complicated because certifying all the data processing of a company is a big job. Sometimes it's also not even useful. Because, for example, if it is an easy data processing activity, you do not need to advertise this to the market. Probably is a nonsense to go and spend an effort to certify it. It's better to certify what you need to do. It's also defining, for example, which are the activities that a processor is doing to define exactly then what we have to do this certification, what we have to audit, what we have to understand the company is doing. That's because the preparation phase, during the preparation phase, the company, should be engaged and usually is engaged before. Also because we need to make an offer to the company, how much time we have to spend to do this certification. And we need to understand exactly which are all the items that we need to assess and everything that we need to do. That's because the starting point of the certification body is before this logic. Then we go to the certification phase. So everything is implemented. So when you are going to the certification phase, it's not possible that you have something that is not under control. So you need to be, to have the reliability of what you are doing and to be quite convinced of what you have. However, the certification body, the role of the certification body for the GDPR is strictly linked to the supervising authority that is granting to us the possibility to do this audit. Then, in Europe, we have a specific regulation that is addressing the role of the accreditation bodies. So it could be that in some countries, and we are going to seek accreditation in Italy in this moment, the supervising authority is giving to an accreditation body that could be RVOA, I think is for the Netherlands, for example, could be DAX for Germany, COFRAC for France, Accredia for Italy, ENAC for Spain, is giving the authority to release accreditation. So is accrediting a certification body. So the accreditation body is telling that a certification body like DNV is prepared to do this kind of activity as a third-party evaluation. So it's strictly ruled by the supervising authority and these accreditation bodies. What we do, so, is strictly linked to rules. What we do, for example, is starting with a document review of the company. So the first thing that we do is going through all the documentation, together also with a legal expert, to understand that everything that is necessary for the scope of certification, that is the Europrivacy scheme, has been completely fulfilled by the company. The company has more or less the same checklist that we have, so at the end should be only a matter of discussion. The very difficult that we have as an audit provider, so a certification body, is understanding the company. So what I told you at the very beginning, that this examination is not always true, because we need to understand exactly how a company is dealing with some things. Because you have a question, but it is not that all the companies have the same answer. Every company, because of the dimension, because of different things, could have a different answer to the same question. Obviously, if you consider certifying a small company of 5 people is completely different than certifying Amazon Web Services, for example. It's a complete different story. Only finding the person to interview when you need to do something is completely different. But at the end, long story short, we do the document review. So if everything is fixed, it's okay. Otherwise, we can decide that there is something that you need to correct, and you can give time to the company to do that, because the certification, the initial certification, is divided in 2 steps. A step 1 that is a document review and a step 2. During the step 1, you do also a very fast gap analysis. That is, understanding how the processes are working for the company to be sure that the company will be ready for the step 2. That is the initial certification where we are granting the certificate. The initial certification is not only, it's like we see that the dress is nice, the dress is well done, but we need to be sure that every time the company is creating a new dress should be of the same beauty as the first one. That's because we are auditing at the end not only the documentation, but we are interviewing also the people to understand how much the processes are under control. There are different logic, we can use that. There are also some rules in the certification in Europrivacy. There are some additional rules that we can apply, but the logic is this. If you do not have findings that are going to make you think as a certification body that the company is out of control, so big non-conformities, then you are granting the certificate. This means that you are giving to the company it's a piece of paper at the end, that could be, but is a certificate that is telling the company for this kind of data processing activity is conforming to the requirements of the scheme or of the national obligation that the scheme is proposing. This is the logic on how the certification works. There is a certificate decision, is always a third-party evaluation, what we are doing. At the end of everything, as Pieter said, during your speech, the certification is valid for 3 years. But every year, we need to do an audit that is a smaller audit than the first one, that is going to enable us to check whether the certification is, still under control. So it's a smaller effort at the end, but we need every year to do that. And every 3 years, we are reviewing everything to be sure that 3 years is always, if there are minor changes or some changes that we need to address. During this period of validity of this certification, eventually the company could also decide to increase the number of data processing activity that wants to put under certification. It's a smaller effort because, for example, the technical part usually is the same, it's not changing. But during the life of the certification, you can extend to other data processing activity, and the certification body is going by you and extending also this kind of certification. Okay, the certification process is that, is nothing more than that. We have a role that is a third-party role, so we are not linked with the implementer for the company, yes, because we need to audit but obviously it's always a joint job that we are doing. As I told you before, it's not that it's a black and white activity, the activity of the certification body. It is an activity that is understanding the company. That's because there is also a collaboration role, even if we need to be aware that the certification body has a third-party role that is granting an independent certification that is going to give to the market the reliability of what we are putting in this certificate. That's it by my side. I think I covered everything.
Yeah,
and we have also time for the questions.
Yes, indeed. I think it's about 5 o'clock. Very effective. It's like 5-0. Are there particular questions from your side?
So suppose, say we approach for an assessment and we want certification. So how long does the entire procedure take? Does it depend from what kind of processing activity is it? How long would it usually take? How many months or how many days?
I would say fundamentally, of course, as you mentioned, it varies according to I would say mainly to the level of maturity. If you are already fully compliant, what you need is fundamentally to document. To document, you can do it manually yourself, or we have also partners in the ecosystem, like SAP, for instance, which will be releasing soon a module to document directly through SAP platform the compliance with the different criteria. We have other partners like Smart Global Governance and others which are joining the ecosystem, like world leaders in the compliance platform. And then you can use it so it can go very fast. Once you have documented, if you're ready, then you need to invite the certification body to come. Now, if you want to be on the safe side, and that's where there's a real added value by partners like Timelex and others who bring the expertise. They will help you to prepare everything. They have the experience, the expertise, they know how it works, they are really trained for that. So then you can save a lot of time, and it can go very, very fast in this sense. Now, if on the process you identify non-conformities, you will have to address them. So typically you may have to review, for instance, some element of your policy, internal policy or security or data protection policy, and then it depends on the decision-making process you have internally. One thing but which again doesn't take a lot of time, but you need to do is a NOCAR, is to assess what is the level of compliance with your national obligation, complementary national obligation. That's something specific, which ensure that we are not delivering a certification which is compliant with the GDPR, but breaching, for instance, the CNIL or the French regulation if you're in France, or the national regulation. So that's a mechanism that we discuss with the ADPB. So you have one or two elements, but that doesn't take, in particular if you have a law firm, they can do it very straight away. They have all the resources to make it so it doesn't take a lot of time. What can take time is if you identify non-compliance, to address them. And then for the certification body, I'll let you answer.
For the certification body, it's much easier because everything is ruled. So at the end, the specific effort that you have to spend on site by the company is a matter of days, is not a matter of weeks. So you spend a few days by the company because you need to assess as a third party what has been done by the company. So it's much easier. The only issue that you can have is between stage 1 and stage 2. Usually, the accreditation body is asking to have at least 2 weeks of elapsed time that is giving the possibility to the company to solve if there are some minor issues. But then, of course, it's a matter of weeks, the scope of certification in terms of elapsed time, not in terms of... It could be that eventually, if in stage 1 we found that there are something that need to be addressed, that is going to have the necessity for the company to go a little bit through the processes, could be that you are spending a little bit more time to do that. But usually it's a matter of 3-4 weeks, the elapsed. Maximum you can have also 6 months, but depending on what we found on the stage 1, that it's quite unusual if we have a good preparation before.
And I would add maybe 2 elements. On one, maybe we didn't mention during the presentation, the fact that you need us, of course, to select your partners. So either implementers on the site, so to see then to contact. And the good news that usually implementers in the ecosystem are committed to really support facilitate. They didn't come just to say, oh, there's a business opportunity. We really worked on selected partners who are committed to deliver a high quality service, also to guide, to help. So if you contact them, for instance, Timelex or the partners, they will be available to help you to assess, to do, and to give you already, I guess I cannot speak for them, but to without any commitment, without any cost, just to give you feedback. So you have, first of all, this element. Then the other element, which is important to mention, as it is a new scheme, it was adopted in October, so now we are going through Article 43. Partners like DNV are going through the accreditation, so they are already starting to work both with the accreditation authorities, but with the first clients to prepare the first European Data Protection Seal. The good news, as in the GDPR, that you don't need to have necessarily a certification body in your own country, that wherever you are located, you just need to select certification body which have been accredited in any one of the EU jurisdictions, which means that even if you are based, let's say, in Estonia, you don't have a certification body, you can go, for instance, contact DNV and they can send auditors to support you. So it's very flexible. It's very
local auditors
designed. Yeah, of course, but you have this possibility really so it's really an idea of holistic approach, of ecosystem approach, or systemic approach, if you want.
Just wanted to add to that. Maybe I think what takes most time is probably learning how about scheme, what you need to document, all this, and this is where partners like Timelex can just kickstart the process. We can get that done very quickly, and then it's just a matter of how many non-conformities.
So it would basically be like you would give us a checklist of what we need to have, and we would have to get ready with all the documents in order for you to tell us yes, it's compliant or not.
Exactly. Yes, and so if you're very mature, you have everything available, then it's just a matter of mapping it to the criteria, which is very strictly aligned to the GDPR. So that wouldn't be that.
It is important to say that the implementer could also eventually write for you some documentation that is missing.
Yes,
the consultant could. The certification body could not. It can only assess what has been already done by the company. Otherwise, it's a conflict of interest. So we're going to certify what we do. So the certification body is only assessing.
Could you be a bit more louder?
Sorry. The implementer could also help you in building the documentation that is missing. So, for example, the implementer could also write for you some procedures if these are missing. The certification body, no. Certification body could only do the certification. We cannot create something. We can only assess what is done, what has been done.
By certification body, you mean the auditors, right?
The auditors, yes.
So once everything is ready, the auditors would come and just see if everything is
Yes.
in line with the certification requirement and certify that it's GDPR compliant.
Yes.
Okay.
What we name implementers are law firms or consulting
help us
firms
be-
who will help to prepare.
Okay.
That's why we said often there are two ways to you have the possibility to do it by yourself, and that's doable, but what we recommend is more to work with the ecosystem, because then you have qualified partner will help you, and if they identify any gap, they will help you to complete it, to solve, to prepare everything. And they will already do a maturity assessment to ensure that you have everything. And when everything is ready, they will check themselves to say, okay, it's complying with all the requirements. Then you call the auditor, and the auditor comes to verify, to check. They will check again, but the good news is that you have, in principle, no surprise in the process. Because if you did it properly and you have the right support, then it's kind of more or less automatic. So the idea is to avoid losing a lot of time, but to ensure a high level of confidence and compliance. So that's really where this process is a nice continuation. You have a really nice, you have to comply with the GDPR, then you can ask a partner to come as an implementer to prepare the certifications and to review, to help you identify any gaps you may identify, maybe little things. Give you an example, something which is very typical when you have, so often people forget that, for instance, if you are using icon on a website, it should be machine readable. It seems stupid, but sometimes you want to do well, and you add icons to better communicate, but you forget to make it machine readable. And so the formal obligation of the GDPR. So you may have sometimes dead angles or blind spots that you don't, you forget about it. And through the criteria, we will systematically analyze all the obligation, and then you may identify maybe one or two blind spots, and you will have the partners to address it, prepare it, and then as soon as it's done, you have your checklist which is already prepared, then the certification body will come and will use the same requirements, same criteria, and just check everything. And as again, the criteria have been designed specifically, you will see it's a special wording to reduce the risk of subjective interpretation, then in principle you don't have surprises. Of course, the auditor is here to challenge it, to see, okay, is it, because again, it's about building trust. It's not window dressing exercise. But if you want to reduce the uncertainty for you, for your stakeholder and the third parties, it's a very efficient mechanism. You're welcome.
Just
Yep,
one last
sure.
question.
No,
From your experience, how big is the gap between an ISO certification, the team certification, and this certification, and in particular on the documentation side? Because I know the scope is different, right? The ISO is either controller or processor, and
yeah.
maybe more general, but how big is this gap?
So, first of all, there is one element, and I will let Giovanni complete, but there is one element which is interesting, that in the scheme itself, if you have a valid ISO 27001 or 27701, if you're not processing high-risk data, personal data processing, which means, for instance, special categories of data or data of minors of age, there's a clear definition, then you can use your ISO 27701 as an equivalent to a subset of the criteria we have in Europrivacy. It's very specific. So sometimes you can synergize. But fundamentally, if you are complying with the GDPR, the gap in principle should be very limited in terms of documentation. But of course, the focus of, I would say, a GDPR certification compared to an ISO 27001, or even with the extension 27701, you're more focused on the management systems. And in this case, there are criteria which are related to the management system. So you will find very close mapping. So we have also a very clear mapping between Europrivacy criteria and the older standards, so ISO, global CBPR, and so on. But you will have more requirements regarding, for instance, the lawfulness of your data processing, which is specific to your data processing, which will change from one data processing to another. So you will have requirements regarding the data protection by design by default in place, compliance with the national obligation if were required. So you have a certain number of the rights of the data subject. So again, the GDPR is more about the rights of the data subject and security process. Security is important. So the focus is a little bit different, but it's very highly complementary. And we developed the scheme in close cooperation with ISO. So with the headquarters of ISO working on trying to, again, the idea is not to complicate the life of the DPO, but it's to make something highly reliable, trustable, but efficient at the same time.
Yes, the view of the certification body, because I'm doing both kind of certification, is a matter of mindset when you are doing the activity. So when you are certifying a PIMS, so a Privacy Information Management System, you are certifying a process and you're using the documents, or an informative as an evidence that the process is working in the right way. When you are certifying a data processing activity, it's the contrary. So you check all the documents that need to be available and you go for the process only to be sure that then they are going to maintain these documents. It's a complete different logic of mindset when you're doing the audit. The PIMS is more, you discuss a lot with the company, there are processes, responsibilities that you have also in the other case. But in the other case, it's mostly important, the legal part, that all the documentation is available. So you go directly in the specific process and then you look at the PIMS as a support for that.
Yeah.
So it's a completely different mindset.
Do you do it on the same day, on the same exercise?
Well, it's the best thing because at the end you can combine the two in the right way. So obviously, if you can combine a 27001, 2701 with Europrivacy, is the perfect one. The only issue is that with one you are going to the wider organization, and then you are focusing on the specific team. But it's are completely. But it's a logic of I hope that explained you
Yes.
the mindset logic.
And the scheme has been designed for this, to support complementarity. It's not to replace or compete against ISO, not at all.
It's a different.
It provides a complementary scope of certification, which is recognized by the GDPR, because ISO 27001, 27701 are not eligible under Article 42. But then you can have the management system, and then you can identify the priority data processing, which are the most at risk, and then you combine the two together, and that's a perfect combination.
On the extreme, you can have, you can combine together, but they also completely be not conjoined. But for example, you can have also a situation where all the documentation is ready, and you don't need to have a management system because the company is very small and not complicated. You can go for certification because you have the confidence that everything is going smooth, also because of the non-complexity. On the contrary, you can go for a global certification for 27701 without going for our privacy. But these are the two extremes. Obviously, the best for us as a certification body could be, have a joint action on both.
And maybe another element which is important that, as I was mentioning in the presentation, it's not only about certification, it's a way to document your compliance. So what you can do, and what we see sometimes companies using the criteria for the time just to document, to structure the compliance. And to review, to ensure. And then deciding once we have completed the documentation, we identify which data processing we want to do. We even know that one of the big four, one of the branch, is using now the criteria to document their own compliance as a consulting companies with all their personal data processing activities. So it's a very flexible tool, very powerful tool, and then you can adapt to your need and you can choose how you want to use it.
Thanks.
Excellent.
So exactly 5:15.
It's 5:15, so this is the end of the workshop and CPDP. One last question, or? Okay, excellent.
Any question still? Or you can come to us if you wish.
Yeah, perfect. Of course, we're available.
And I guess all colleagues will be available if you want to contact
Yes,
them.
very much so. You can always reach out. Contact details are on a QR code, I believe.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So here they are. So should you want, you can always get them. Thanks a lot. Have a great weekend. Thanks for being here.
And thank you for joining us.
Yes.